When I was growing up, I was, like most kids, locked into a variety of different TV shows that I loved watching, whether it be Trapper John MD or Happy Days or MASH or Emergency. All of these were shows that were just part of our normal landscape and made a part of our life in terms of entertainment that I watched on a regular basis. But there was also something that was also powerfully consistent about a lot of these early shows back in the 70s. I didn't necessarily see a lot of people that looked like me. And now as we're moving forward, and there are greater opportunities for people that look like me, what do you do when a generation early on doesn't necessarily see a reflection of who they are on the big screen and on the small screen? This is a chapter that I unpack deeply in my book, Black Generation X, Generation in the Middle, which is available in my shop. So check it out. But I want to talk a little bit more about why it was important for my generation to be exposed to representation that was more reflective of who they were as we were moving into this new world order. You've got to imagine that during the 70s and the 80s, we're talking about this explosion. You're talking about color TV, you're talking about cable, you're talking about different programming platforms and so forth, like HBO and things like that. You're now having more platforms available to expose a greater generation of people to different representations across our local landscape. That these were things that weren't there necessarily before. Prior to, we were mostly limited to basically 3 channels, which was ABC, NBC, and CBS. But now, with the added benefit of additional programming from different areas, we're now able to start exploring and expanding what we're able to see on both the small screen, as well as we're starting to see an explosion of various movies and so forth that are coming out as well. But it's also important to represent something as well. Now that we've come out of Jim Crow, we're now segueing into a particular period of time where you're now having a desegregated, integrated society. And a lot of these people who are coming forth, these kids who are finding themselves in this space, it was important that they saw representation of the entire diaspora on the screen before them, because that was going to shape who they was going forward. Not only for the Black kids who needed to know that there were persons who operated in all these various professions represented on screen as well, but to also reinforce to white kids that excellence is something that can be formed across all diaspora, not just merely people who are white. And it's important to remember, this is one of the reasons why I wrote a book about this, is because I wanted to get people to understand that as we moved forward into this new world order, there also had to be a new world order in terms of how we were to be represented as well, because we had both of these generations, both of these different cultures, predominantly white, predominantly Black, now being interspersed with each other, and they were going to get a more personalized view of how each other viewed the world through the arts. So as we're coming out of the 70s, in this period of time where now we're seeing all these different representations, and you're slowly but surely starting to see representations of us in different programming, whether it be Barney Miller here or there, or Welcome Back Kotter, or even as we see other programs like Good Times and the Jeffersons, we're now getting to the point where members of Generation X are starting to segue into their teenage years. And so it becomes more important to make sure that we provide a representation of what not only their current looks like, but also what their future could look like as well. So if you're talking about the 80s, you're now talking about a brand new landscape. You're talking about the Cosby Show. You're talking about a different world. You're talking about the movie School Daze. You're also transitioning into the early 90s with Living Single. And now all of a sudden, you have mainstream representation of individuals who are doctors, lawyers, business owners, entrepreneurs, instructors. Black people are now being shown representing in these areas as well, which is not indicating that they just materialize anyway, but it was now introducing to this new generation, Generation X, that this was a reality that was available to everyone, not just merely persons who are white. So now you've got this new dimension. So now as we utilize the vehicle, whether it be big screen or small screen, you're also now in a great position where white students, Puerto Rican students, the students of various diasporas are now seeing themselves on screens in different representations and knowing and being reinforced with the reality that this was something that was the norm for them, not the exception. But it just didn't stop there. There were other vehicles that were utilized to tie all these worlds together. Remember, around 1981 is when we saw the emergence of the music television, or MTV. I think roughly around that same time period, Black entertainment television materialized as well. So now what's happening is that you start to get this infusion point where you have other platforms that allows us to get exposed to different types of musics across various genres. and other music was exploding as well. We had just come out of the disco era of the 70s, but now we were segueing into pop. We were segueing into hip hop. We were segueing into rap. We were segueing into punk. We were segueing into all these different diasporas. And what was happening is that young people realized that they didn't have to be not only hamstrung to one particular reality, but they got exposed to each other's reality through representation on these various platforms of BET and MTV, so that they could find different things that they could relate to that was more reflective of who they were. This was new. Unlike previous generations where you only had maybe little snippets or snapshots here and there, and you may have felt off to the side, all of these different things were now being shown in the mainstream. So when you start seeing grunge, when you start seeing, some of the early like Twisted Sister or the Van Halens of the world, or the Run DMCs and the Salt and Peppers, you're now getting a chance to see different diaspora being represented in different vantage points, and everybody's getting exposed to this. So why is this crucial? Because remember, there was no blueprint for how Black Generation X or Generation X or whatever this new integrated society was supposed to move forward with. Remember, we had 200 years of slavery, and then we moved into slaves being free, and there was no blueprint for that as well. There were people who resisted against that, of course, aggressively, and we saw a good 100 years of Jim Crow and restrictive covenants and various discriminatory laws where there was this need to maintain the order of separate in terms of how the community is operating. But now, after nearly almost 300 years of divisive cultural attitudes, we're now in this new situation where effectively you're taking young people who are of different ethnicities and different backgrounds, thrusting them together, and basically tell them, figure this out. But what was wonderful was that there were all these various things that were happening. There was the music, there was the fashion. It was not uncommon to see people wearing things that Madonna would wear or Michael Jackson would wear. All of a sudden, you would see people who would be into Depeche Mode or who was into Rush. And those same people would be into The Time and be into The Deal. It was not uncommon to see, Black kids going to rock concerts and watching Kiss, and seeing white kids out there watching and supporting Public Enemy. What was happening was that this cultural revolution was that all of the individuals came together with this understanding and recognition that being exposed to each other's culture in such an integrated way gave them the ability to understand and see each other in a very different light. And this was not something that was regularly promoted or pushed forward from the previous generations. So now, as we're moving forward, Generation X is now finding themselves in the position where they are recognizing that they are moving in the same space. You're seeing the high top fades. You're seeing the parachute pants. You're seeing the silk gloves and so forth. Everyone is sitting here having similar heroes and similar individuals that they are viewing as cultural and pop icons. We were all in this same mix together. It's important to remember, the arts didn't just entertain us. They defined us. Remember the old adage, art imitates life. So we were now in this new part where we had this new life that no one had ever experienced before, but there was nothing out there that was reflecting it. And the 80s ushered in, and the 80s and early 90s ushered in this new world order of art. We were all in this new space of recognizing that we are now looking at each other and defining the world that we want to see for ourselves. And this was necessary in order for us to grow. Hey, if you liked this video and you thought you got something great out of it, I would encourage you to check out my further content. I just did a book about Generation in the Middle, focusing on Black Generation X, but I've got a wealth of different content that I think you'd really like at very reasonable prices. As always, thank you for tuning in, and I hope you enjoyed what you had a chance to listen to.